was a really new idea during the 1920s and 1930s. It's almost like how we used to think going into outer space is all science fiction and that we could not really do it. But we actually did. When the radio was first introduced on an entertainment level, many people did not believe that it was a real live voice coming out of the headphones. Once people realized this was a true invention, it became a trend during its startup.
Once radio became implemented with a variety of genres, it became really popular and was a must-have product to buy. Radio was not just a scientific experiment. Anymore, it became an everyday hobby to listen to it, just as if we would be on our phones all day. Radio seemed like a smartphone in the 1920s, filled with apps that delivered music, comedy, drama, education, preaching, news, poetry, and entertainment, which included things like live sports and storytelling. The radio had its first regular broadcast on November 2, 1920 on KDKA in Pittsburgh. However, the first radio news program started on Radio 8MK in Detroit, Michigan on August 20th, 1920, which is now known as WWJAM. Once people were amazed at how these radios really work, they became sold out in many stores just between 1923 and 1930. 60% of American families own at least one radio. There was also a spike in Canadian sales too, especially after radio licensing in Canada started in 1920. Also very popular because they could be afforded by the rich and the poor. And if they were sold out, magazines had step-by-step instructions on how to build one for only $3. During 1922, there only had been around 30 Canadian radio stations, but along the mid-1920s, they tripled onto 91 stations. Expansions also had to be done to serve the mass amount of listeners, especially in the smaller, farther away towns and cities. 49% of Canadians' population had only reduced signals, but after that, sales boomed and increased demand. Therefore, 76% of Canadian populations have been part of the radio coverage.
Once radio became really popular and heard among many Canadians, it became a reality to visualize through a live radio broadcast of hockey. It all started with the original Hockey Night in Canada, which was the GM Hockey broadcast, which Foster Hewitt was the announcer. They started off in early November 1931 by broadcasting games for the Toronto Maple Leafs on Saturday nights through the Canadian National Railways radio network. Quebec also later started to broadcast its Montreal Canadiens hockey games. In the end, Saturday nights just became a tradition to gather and listen to the games. Families would cuddle around a huge boxy radio, all fascinated by its live audio production. Although they took turns with the headphones until they created more advanced radios with speakers and higher sound. Radios also had visual enhancements to add more quality into them to attract more buyers. In a result of this great demand of radios, it brought families together and changed the way people could communicate or even receive daily news headlines. It then started to become a competitor with the newspaper. It changed the way people think of the experimental radio and the seeming almost impossible exchange of audio. Just speaking with numbers, in 1923 there was only 10,000 radio receivers in Canada, but at the end of the 1920s there were around 300,000 radios. That just shows how much Canadians really demanded radio service, and because of such a craze for them in 1929, the Government of Canada took ownership of all radio stations, implementing a $1 annual fee for all radios receiving its signals. Radio really did change the way news was transferred and shaped communication during that time. No matter what it took to prove it, people were still amazed by it and how it works. It made everyone want a radio and caused a great increase in demand, just like the usual iPhone being sold out in its first day on store shelves. Once its scientific origin was enhanced and updated, it automatically became a huge trend that everybody wanted during that time. Now we're going to show you the first radio broadcast ever from KDKA.
This is KDKA of the Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company in East Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We shall now broadcast the election returns. We are receiving these returns through the cooperation and by special arrangements with the Pittsburgh Post and Sun. We'd appreciate it if anyone hearing this broadcast would communicate with us, as we are very anxious to know how far the broadcast is reaching and how it is being received. While we're waiting for the returns to come in over the telephone, direct from the Post and Sun, I'll give you the list of offices in today's presidential election. Here they are. Some 30 million Americans are electing a President of the United States, a Vice President, 34 United States Senators, 435 members of the House of Representatives, governors of 34 states, and thousands of minor officers, county judges, and officials. Okay, those are the offices to be filled. And here are the 7 complete presidential tickets that are being voted on. Republican, Warren G. Harding, Calvin Coolidge. Democratic, James M. Cox,